So we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of material to cover. I know that people will continue probably trickling in as we go. But just to start off, we're going to do introductions. My name is Kimberly Muller, and I'm one of the instructional services librarians here at Ellis Library. I tend to work primarily with social science department areas, but I've written a number of systematic reviews in cooperation with the faculty that I tend to work with. My name is Christy Goldsmith. My official job is the assistant director of the campus writing program, which is the program that helps to manage all of the WI courses on campus. So if you've taken a WI course and you teach one, that's our job. My academic home is in the College of Education. My PhD is in English Ed. So I do lots of research on what writers do and how writers are productive and how we can improve that. Okay, and our goal today is to get you to learn a little bit more about literature reviews and kind of discuss what a literature review is. But before we do that, it's happening again. Our slides don't progress as they're supposed to, which is very sad. So I will do it manually. Thank you. So part of the problem with writing a literature review is knowing when to start writing a literature review, right? Like we could read for forever. And so I want to introduce you to a really simple system to improve your fluency, to get rid of that blank page syndrome, and that is to do a quick initial writing. So sometimes we think we shouldn't write until we're ready to write, but we know that writing is generative. It actually creates knowledge in the process of writing. It doesn't just display it. So you have a note card on your chair, or if not, you have one nearby. We have lots of extra writing utensils if you need it, and we will hope to collect these at the end. You don't have to put your name on it. But we're hoping to get some feedback as well. So grab a writing utensil. Now the key with a productive free write or quick write is to not censor yourself. So we don't care about spelling. We don't care about grammar. We don't care about anything like that. We're just trying to get what's in our head to the page as fast as we can, all right? I'm only gonna give you 2 minutes to do it because we have a lot to get through. And here's what I'd like you to think about. So you can think about what is the purpose of a literature review to you, right? There's no right or wrong answer. There are many purposes and many disciplines have different purposes. Or maybe you want to start listing the components of a literature review, all right? Or maybe you want to think about the process. So when I sit down to start a literature review, what do I do? So pick the one you think you might like to focus on just for 2 minutes of writing. And then fill out your note card and stop if you get to the bottom of the front page. We're just going to do the front, whichever you consider the front. I think the lines are front. So when you get to the bottom of the line, just stop. All right? Take a few minutes and think about what you know about literature reviews. Take about 20 seconds to finish the thought you're on. Find a partner near you, or you might have to move if you're all by yourself. And first introduce, just your first name will be fine, but also tell your discipline, because we've noticed that sometimes disciplinary differences emerge in this conversation. So name, discipline, and then
talk about what you wrote about. You can either share a piece that you wrote, a sentence or two, or you can just give the gist of what you were thinking about. All right, we'll do this again very quickly. We're gonna do it for 2 minutes.
And for those of you online, please share in the chat box with each other. Again, name, discipline, and maybe 1 or 2 things that you wrote down.
All right, let's come back together. There's nothing, as a teacher, there's nothing more pleasing to me than a room full of strangers talking that loudly. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's just have a quick share out because we're going to talk about all of this, and then I'll hand it over to Kimberly so we can know what we really should focus on. But who has a pretty good idea for number 1? What's the purpose of a literature review? You want to know?
I guess to understand the state of the current research in a certain field of research and figure out like what new we can do.
I like that. So figure out what's happened and what new thing we can do. Excellent. What about components? Any major components you talked about that emerge every time? What are the parts of a lit review?
Oh, when and what previous conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that who did the research, what kind of research they did, what methodology perhaps it was, what their findings were, right? Good. And then finally, what process? How do you start? You want to have a good conversation about how you start doing a lit review? That's always the worst part, right?
Reading.
Sorry, what did you say, sir?
Go to the library.
I love it.
Yes.
Kimberly,
Yes.
reading, right?
You get a day.
Amassing a big pile of things. Very good. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about.
And I
next.
did see some people online said similar things. Look for the gaps. Just another way of phrasing it is figuring out where maybe research hasn't been done yet. So where can you fit into that conversation? Okay, so nope, I'm going to keep trying this button. It's going to keep not working for me. So we will progress on to the next slide manually. We're just talking about the different types of literature reviews. We discussed kind of what literature reviews do, but I think there's this vague notion that all literature reviews are the same. When in academic literature, sometimes we use the same word to talk about a number of different things. So when we use the term literature review, there's actually 3 big versions that exist. The first one is the background for an article. This one's pretty straightforward. You see it in almost every academic research article that you read or write, and it gives context for the research that's to follow. So your reader can say, okay, well, here's maybe what's happened already in the field. Scholarship is a conversation. Our research doesn't exist in a void. And so we're saying, here's what's already been done that I'm building on, and I'm adding to that knowledge. And you kind of now can understand what I'm adding to the conversation because you'll know what it is. So that one I think is pretty typical and the one you might see the most frequently. Number 2 is an entire review article. This is a publication that's kind of unique and has some specific characteristics that you don't see in other publications. The entire article is a review or a literature review. Typically, there's no new information that's generated. There's just different ways of synthesizing that information. So I like to use the forest for the trees metaphor. Oftentimes researchers, we tend to get really focused on our subject areas and really dedicated to our projects. So we see the little piece that our project zooms in on, but we don't see the whole field as a bigger picture. And review articles tend to try to take the whole field and put it together. So if you're not familiar with the field, or if you're coming in new and you're a new professor, maybe you want to look at a literature review and say like, okay, well, maybe what's everything that's out there? There are several different types of review articles. The first one is your generic literature review. This one just kind of puts everything out there and says, here's all of the material, make of it what you will. The second one is called a systematic review. In addition to just putting out all of the material, typically these types of articles synthesize the material. So they try to say, okay, well, you know, paper number 1 has these measures and these outcomes, and paper number 2 uses completely different measures and outcomes. So how do we compare those two? How do we bring them together? And they try to pull all the different articles that might be existing around a certain topic, but synthesize them in relationship to each other. And I have kind of a diagram up here so you can see that systematic reviews are a type of literature review. Meta-analyses are a type of systematic review. So we're getting narrower and narrower in scope, but we're still talking about literature reviews and review articles as a thing. And meta-analyses are systematic reviews, but with a lot of data, a lot of statistics and numbers. So if you're a numbers person, maybe meta-analyses are the things for you. And again, they try to take those measures and outcomes, but turn them into percentages and data and statistics that you can have a quantitative take on. So they say, here's the whole field, and quantitatively, here's what we get from it. Here's what it means. So these are really useful for a couple of reasons. One, they can, again, give you the bigger picture if you've been focusing on the smaller picture or you want to know what that bigger picture is. But two, it's also usually a really specifically done research. And I phrase that strangely, but any good research that's done can be recreated, right? So if you run a study, oftentimes there's a methodology section of an article that explains how you ran that study, what the steps were. Systematic reviews, literature reviews, meta-analyses do the exact same thing. And I want to point this out because if you plan to write a systematic review or a literature review, you want to carefully document each stage of that process so that someone else coming and looking at the same field could recreate your literature review and find the same resources and find the same conclusions. So you want to, again, have that standard of quality to your work where you're saying, look, I didn't just make up these numbers. I didn't make up this data. I went through these very specific processes and here was the result. You too would wind up getting the same result. So we're going to talk about that more as we go. But I want to touch on the third type of literature review. So we've talked about backgrounds for an article. We've talked about entire articles that are review. And the third one is the dissertation. Dissertation reviews are kind of a mix of the first two that we discussed. So you are just giving background. It doesn't necessarily have to be as comprehensive. You're not looking at the whole field, you're giving context. But similarly to something like a systematic review, you have to provide enough context to prove that your research is brand new and it's original. So your dissertation isn't necessarily entirely comprehensive. You don't have to keep track of it as specifically and systematically, but you do have to prove that you did due diligence and you looked at the field broadly enough to figure out what was original and what was new and how your research fills a gap that maybe has existed for a while. So these are the different types of dissertations and review articles. They're all a little bit different. And I'm going to move on to my next slide, which asks, which literature review do we want to talk about today? There's three big ones. Again, you've got the background for an article, review articles where the entire thing is a review, and then dissertation. So show of hands, how many of you are interested in learning about article backgrounds? Okay, a couple hands. How many of you are interested in learning about review articles, like a systematic review or a meta-analysis? Just a few more. And how many of you are interested in learning about this for dissertation purposes? So most people in the room said dissertation. I'm going to pull up the chat really quickly.
Online, we have a dissertation, review articles, lots of dissertation.
Lots of dissertation. Okay, so we'll kind of focus on that piece a little bit more than some of the others. I'll still touch on them, but I'll still touch on all three. So don't worry if you aren't here for dissertations. We're still going to address those, but I will try to gear more of the topics toward dissertations and writing those as well. Okay, so your first step is actually running a search, finding materials. This is, as someone mentioned earlier, why you might contact a librarian. And there are lots of pieces to this. Your search, you want it to be something that covers the field, is recreatable, and something that you could keep track of all of your criteria. Why did you include certain articles? Why did you exclude certain articles? And we're going to go into that in more detail, but specifically through use of the library. So I've generated kind of a topic that we're going to run through and use as an example. So you can see different search patterns and different ways that you might search. I am going to start off using the gray box that is the library's homepage, just because it is a basic starting point. So you want to point out, though, this is a discovery layer. It's a tool that is unique to the University of Missouri. It does not exist elsewhere. It pulls a little bit of many different resources MU has, but this means it's not recreatable. So it's a good place to start and try out searches and see if you're finding things using the language that you're searching, but it's not something that you can use for something like a systematic review. It would be great for background, it would be great for dissertation, but if you want to have something recreatable, you're going to go into specific databases like PsycInfo or ERIC, and then keep track exactly of those databases that other people could run identical searches in. Just to touch on that really quickly. So I'm going to start off. My topic that I'm using for an example is using computer games in education with kids who have autism, because that happened in a class recently that I taught, so the example's fresh in my mind. But to start off with, I'm going to type in computer games and hit enter, because I think our searches all are a lot easier to use when you're in the actual search itself. You'll notice, oh, well, it's telling you to log in. You shouldn't need to do that in the library, but that's okay. Oh. Okay, well, this is a good example. If you're off campus and you are wanting to use the library resources, you should have access regardless of where you are. You don't need to be in the library. You don't need to be on campus. Your login is just your paw print and password, the same thing that you use for everything else. And now we should have full and complete access. You'll notice that it's set up with several search bars. Hopefully this is a little bit of review for some of you. This is meant to guide you into breaking your search up into a string that finds more resources. I'm going to talk about that very quickly. It's not really what this session is about, but just as a refresher for some research skills, there are a couple tricks that you might use. The first is quotation marks. Can anyone tell me what quotation marks do in a search?
They require that the words are bolded.
Yep. Yep, it requires that the words are used as a phrase. So instead of looking for the word game off on its own, we're going to search for computer games as a whole unit now. So I can say, okay, computer games. And what was the rest of my topic? Education and autism. Those are my main pieces. You can add as many of these subject fields as you want. And each subject field that you add is going to narrow your topic down further and further. The term "and" sounds like it should expand things, but actually limits your search, and works like a Venn diagram. So you've got those overlapping circles and you only want to find the overlap. So I'm telling my search now, I only want topics that include all three of these parts, which is why I use each individual line. The flip side of that is the term "or," and "or" lets you expand out. So now I'm saying I don't care if the article talks about computer games or video games, but I wanted to talk about one of them. Either or is fine. So I think the first step to any good search, whether it's for article background, whether it's for a dissertation, whether it's for writing a systematic review, is to figure out the language that your field uses. It's not always going to necessarily be the terms that you're familiar with or the terms that are necessarily correct. For example here, I might use an asterisk. Does anyone know what the asterisk does? Another pop quiz, yeah.
And you got it.
Yes, it finds other endings basically. So in this particular case, I used it for autism. So it's getting autism and also autistic. Maybe that's not the term that's used as frequently here in the United States, but it is internationally, and it is when you look at anything that's before the DSM-5, so a couple of years previously. So another example of that, educat with an asterisk is going to get educate, education, educational, educating. All those alternate endings only have to write it out once. I'm going to throw in a few of those other terms that might relate. So education or teaching or learning, literacy or classroom, you get the idea. Okay, so I'm going to run that search. I have a lot of results. I got about 25,000 results. No one wants to look through 25,000 results. I am a librarian and I get excited about articles and results, and I don't want to look through that many. But there are a number of ways that we can limit this. The first one is by publication date. This is where we start getting into things like inclusion and exclusion criteria. Those are usually two sides of the same coin. For example, my inclusion criteria might be it was published in the last 5 years. My exclusion criteria might be it was published more than 5 years ago. If you're in a field that relates to the sciences, typically 5 years is considered a good cutoff. 10 years is like absolute maximum date, because after that things have changed and they start getting obsolete. This obviously is different if you're looking at, say, how did technology impact the education of kids with autism in the 2000s versus in the 1990s. So if you're looking at a historical perspective, that's going to be a little bit different, but you absolutely could change it this way. Another way is to, I'm going to do that really quickly and say maybe 2010 on. Another way to do this is you'll notice there's a box for peer-reviewed journals. This is going to cut out things like newspaper articles, magazines, sometimes books as well, but there are often better ways to search for books. So just know that you have that as an option. The final one I want to talk about are these drop-down lists by any of these terms. Right now, we're looking for these terms anywhere. They could show up in the abstract and be made part of the article, but they could also show up in the middle of the text somewhere and absolutely have no relevance to our topic at all. So what we might want to do is limit it by abstract, that paragraph that's like a summary of an article, by subject term, there are keywords that most authors or indexers tend to link to each article, or by title. It does get narrower and narrower and narrower based on these. So I might throw these 2 fields into the title search, and you would play around with this and see which search came up with the best result. There's no right or wrong or perfect way to do it. But you'll see now I have a much more manageable number to work with. I only have 55, which frankly, for doing literature review is a pretty small number. I'd probably go back and start again and be like, I should have way more. I know there's more on this topic, but it's because we limited to just the title for the purpose of this example. Keep in mind, if you're in a subject-specific database, you're also going to find fewer results because you're not searching quite as much material. So it's already going to make this an easier process for you. Okay, so that's kind of all I'm going to discuss on searching. If you have more questions about searching and strategies, please do contact your librarian. There's a list of all of them on the library's homepage under the contact us link. And they can talk to you about what strategies to use, what terminology to use, and what databases that you might want to include in your search. However, there are a couple other things that I want to touch on really quickly. Some articles have this PDF full text icon. That's pretty straightforward. If you click on it, it opens. You can use it. The only difference between this article and the one up there that has the find it at MU is who sold us the article. The gray box that we searched in the beginning was sold to us by one vendor that also sold us this article, so they made it look prettier. But if you click on the find it at MU, one of 2 things is going to happen. Most of the time, it will take you to the article you're looking for, because MU does have a pretty great collection and access to different journals and different articles. However, if it takes you to a page that says the article is not available, MU doesn't have everything. You always have the option to request it through interlibrary loan. This is a pretty fast process. Most articles are electronic. I've gotten them within the hour of asking for them. It's not always quite that fast. If you request it at midnight or something, there's not necessarily a librarian working at that time, but usually it's a pretty quick turnaround. So if you come up with an article that you really need to be comprehensive in your literature review, please do take a look here. Okay. Other things to note. If you open up an article, you get a toolbar on the right-hand side of the page that has a number of really useful components. The first one I want to point out is permalink. The URL at the top of the page will not work if you send it to yourself. This can be very frustrating if you're compiling a list of articles to go through later, and then you go back to that list and you can access none of the articles. So instead, the permalink is going to create a URL in the middle of the page that does work consistently you can use.
Otherwise, that gives authors the credit for the download of the citation as well, right?
Yes.
So that's important for citation metrics and all that.
Yes. Yes, it doesn't count as a citation because you haven't necessarily cited it in an article yet, but we do pull some of these numbers to see how many times an article has been saved. So if you are a faculty member going up for review, promotion, or tenure, or third-year review, you can talk to your librarian and we will pull metrics on all of your publications for you too. Just another fun of things the libraries can do for you. Other tools on this sidebar that I really like, the cite option just pulls MLA, APA type formats. But, however, since you're attending this workshop, you're very invested in research and writing, I really recommend using a citation management tool. If you have not already, EndNote, Zotero, and Mendeley are the 3 citation management tools that the University of Missouri supports. They're There are workshops on those later. You can find flyers in the back and online. Some more information. They are hands-on because it's kind of a guiding through the process, but I really recommend them. They write your bibliography for you. So you save articles as you go, and rather than having to type in every single reference for in-text citation, basically it puts your citations in while you're writing, and at the end you can create bibliography, and it creates it for you in whichever style that you've selected and chosen. It saves so much time and effort. And that is what this export option does. If I hit export, it's going to send this article in a PDF to the citation management tool of my choosing. In my particular computer, I use Mendeley. So you'll notice there's a little red M in the top right corner of my screen. That also will send things to Mendeley. If I just click that button, it's going to say like, hey, which folder do you want to send it to? Which is very lovely and saves me a lot of time and effort. The other way that you can use this, if you're running a systematic review, you're trying to be comprehensive, you run the search and you have to save all of the articles. So I might come up with 1,000 articles and I want to save all of them in my citation management tool. So at the top of each search, regardless of what database you're in, all of these things that I'm teaching you to work in every single database that you go to, there's going to be a share option. For me here, again, it's that export results. The export will send me a file that sends every single article in my search that I've run to my citation management tool. And then I can send things to different folders. And I can say, well, you know, maybe these are excluded because they're too old. So I have a folder for things that are beyond my scope. Or these are, you know, excluded for other reasons, but you keep track of all of them. So when you write up your methodology, you can say, well, originally we had 1,200 results and we only kept 18 of them. Here's why. And you have numbers for each of those, like 54 of them related to healthcare. We weren't actually talking about healthcare. Sounds like I'm using some very specific examples, and I am. I'm going to pull up my Mendeley. Told you I use Mendeley. One of the reasons I like it is it tends to be software that lives on your computer, but it also lives on the web. So similar to Google Docs, if you use Google Docs or Google Drive, you can access this regardless of what computer you're on. Zotero also is really great because it's free. So if you're not affiliated with the university, or if you're a graduate student who plans on, maybe you're in social work, one of my departments who plans on working in an organization rather than at a university, a free tool might be the one that is best for you. And all of them have some similar features. And Zotero is going this way too. So it's a matter of preference. Some of my colleagues prefer one over the other. We argue about it. They're all great. But you'll notice that I have groups. So we can go into one and say, like, this is a systematic review that I'm working on right now. And I'll have folders, like these are some of the final articles that we're definitely planning on using in our review. But we also kept all of our results. You'll see we have all the results to move. And then we have different folders of things like we chose not to look at minors. We're only looking at adult population. So we have a folder that has all of our articles actually related to minors that we don't have to actually read. And then the ones that we do keep. The citation management tool includes a PDF. So I can edit it in this tool, which is really nice. It also has the title and abstract. So before I even read it, I can decide, okay, which folder do I want to move this into? Are we going to use it? And I can read the whole article, which is cool. Other things I like about Mendeley, you'll notice along the top, but it's got a couple other options. The funding tool is really nice too. It takes a look at the articles that you're saving and some of your research topics and can suggest grants for you to apply to or other options for funding. And this is really great, especially if you're in a field where maybe there aren't as many funding options. So I think some of the sciences, there's better listservs and better information sent out about that. And maybe for some of the social science organizations, that's not as true. Again, this is something that's available whether you're associated with the university or not. It also has data sets. So if you need to keep track of data, if you produce a lot of data, I know NSF, NIH, and a lot of other granting institutions require you to keep track of your data now. This is an option that can help you. It also will help you find data sets. If you want to use someone else's data set, you can use it through this. So that's just a quick plug for citation management tools. They're great. We have other workshops on them. So I'm going to move on here and talk about one last piece of this before I hand it over. I'm going to open up an article as an example. Every article that you come across is going to have the same structure and kind of the same anatomy. This is true whether it's a literature review or if it's a general research article. You're going to start off with the abstract. Then you're going to have a section called the introduction. Sometimes it's titled background, sometimes it's titled literature review. Again, it's that background of the field. So that's your first main section. Your next section is going to be methodology. So did they do surveys? How many participants took the survey? If it was literature review, what was the search string that was used? And what databases did you run that string in? How many results did you find? After methodology, you get the results. So, okay, we did the survey or we ran the search and here's what we found. Here were the data. This section usually is going to include your tables, your charts, your graphs, all those good details. And then at the very bottom, you get your conclusion or your discussion. So it kind of ties back around what you found to the literature review and says, look, here's what we contributed to the field. Maybe here's some of the limitations. And every article that you come across is probably going to be laid out somewhat similarly. So you see our abstract. Well, this was a good example. The abstract even has all those pieces in it. But then there's an introduction. The introductions you can usually tell because there's a lot of citations. You get down to, I skipped methods. Yep, there's materials and methods in this one. We get to our results, and then at the very bottom, we'll have our discussions and conclusions. I'm skipping past some of these things because I don't think it's necessary for us to read this particular article. But you get the idea, it's always going to be laid out somewhat similarly. And finding examples is a really good way to go about getting used to feel if you're not used to writing. For dissertations, this is absolutely true. We're going to talk about this a little bit at the end if we have time, but there are examples for Mizzou dissertations that have been published in your field. You can actually search for them going back to 1970. So if you're panicking a little bit about the thought of writing, looking at an example, seeing what other people have done is an absolutely great way to get an idea of how to go about that. My last piece on this is going to be the references. References are wonderful. Obviously, I'm a librarian, I have to say that, but it's true. They've done some of the work for you. So if you come across an article that seems spot on your topic and is perfect for your topic, look at the bibliography, see who they cited. And if you see the same authors being cited in every article you come across, you probably should look at that work too. So let them pull some of those materials together for you. That forward and backward searching piece is a really big part of joining the conversation and figuring out how you fit into it. Tip though, a lot of those references link back to the literature review for the background of the article. You don't cite the literature review or the background. This is something we see our students do pretty frequently at the beginning when they're starting writing, because it's like, oh, well, everything's in one place for me. That's convenient. But in fact, they're already citing someone else. So if you see something great in the background section of an article, use it, but go back to the original source where it came from. Okay, I am going to pass this on now to Christy to talk about the actual writing portion once I get this. Thank you.
All right, so we know we talk fast naturally because we have so much to say, but we're also happy to slow down or go back or answer questions. So feel free to flag us down if you have a question. So I have no expertise on searching. In fact, I wish I had known Kimberly when I was writing my own dissertation because I learned so much from that today. But I do have a little bit of expertise on starting the writing process. And the first thing that we do to start the writing process in literature reviews is the reading process. However, as we mentioned, you could read for forever for literature review and never stop, right? So I'm going to provide you first a few strategies for maybe dealing with the reading, and then a few strategies for getting started writing as well. I'm going to try to find hers. Let's see if the clicker works first before we go too far. It always works for me. It likes me.
I don't understand.
So I really like this new framing. Harris is a composition rhetoric scholar, and I really like this new framing of texts as projects. So I think we're trained, and as a former high school teacher, I think I did some of the training. We've trained people to read text for information, for bits, right? For factlets, for what we can get from it. But Harris says that's not the best way to do a literature review. Because if we start reading for these little factlets, these little disconnected facts, what we have is a big pile of facts that don't connect in any way, right? That don't maybe get the whole tenor of the project. And so she says that a project is something far more complex than a main idea. So not just collecting these main ideas, but thinking about what sort of questions are they asking and what sort of answers are they getting. So thinking of this work as a broader sort of thing, and understanding that we can't just read an article and all get the same thing from that article, right? Reading is a making meaning process, and we all have to make sense of what we read. And so I have a few suggestions on the next slide of how to read for projects. I think it saves time. I also think it helps you easily exclude, like Kimberly was talking about, or easily figure out when you're going down the wrong path. So this book
I think is really wonderful. Is this one that's in the library that we looked last time?
We ordered it.
Okay, good. This is the on order. I have one in my office. I'll tell you where that is shortly. You're welcome to come look at it. But this is also a composition rhetoric scholar, and she has this framing of interactive reading. And so she says that when we go to get an article, first of all, she says, don't print out every article that you think you want to read. We've all done that, right? You're like, I'm gonna have a productive day. I'm gonna go to the library and print 100 articles. And then half of them aren't useful, or then you've spent your entire reading time printing things, right? So she says to first skim through the article with a pencil or with an annotation marking tool. Skim through it quickly. So focusing on the big picture before you go to the copy machine and do the copying if you have to, or before you waste the paper, really look at it and focus on the big picture. And she's emphatic that we use a pencil or pen, but not a highlighter. Because highlighting is a passive action, right? When you're highlighting, all you're thinking is like, oh, I'm highlighting, I went too far, right? That's what we think about when we highlight. She says that you must actually make language in the margins or underline and add a note to it so that we really know why we've done what we've done. We've all underlined things and later been like, why did I underline that, right? So making notes is really important. She suggests that over half of our articles will be thrown out by doing this, right? Or we'll put them into categories and say, these categories don't matter, I'm gonna focus on this one. So that's a really great way to deal with the reading overload that if you're new to grad school is a very real thing, right? We're all trying to deal with that. And then she says, after you figure out the big picture, quickly skim the whole article for the sections that Kimberly discussed, for the methods, for the discussion, before taking notes. Sometimes all you need to read is the discussion, right? That's all that matters because it's the new information. It may be instead a seminal article where you want to read the whole thing very carefully because it's very foundational. So read through all those parts very quickly, focusing probably on the discussion or the results section to make sure that you want to take notes, and then dive in with your pencil. And in doing so, her name's Peggy, or Peg. Peg says that we should engage in a conversation with the author. So rather than gathering facts that I learned from articles and dumping them into a thing, I think that's how I read for grad school for many years, is I would like make a Word document and add all my facts that I learned, and then they never connected to anything and it was not useful, right? She says we're gonna engage in a conversation with the author. So the goal of a literature review, as we mentioned, is to sort of dip into the field, the subject matter, figure out what's going on, figure out where I fit, and that's exactly what we would be doing if we're sitting in a room with all of those scholars, right? So ask questions, make connections, do things that will sort of generate knowledge rather than just making notes. And you'll remember it better too, that's the science of reading. And then she also says, you might want to, if you're a social scientist, you might want to really focus in on the theory used, because we use theory a lot in social science. If you're a hard scientist, maybe you're really focusing on the method that, or the way that they did their project. But figuring out what's most important to you and your literature review and read just for that point. And then, can we make this go ahead for just a minute? I don't want to touch your computer because I'm a Mac user and I will explode it. So this thing I think was really interesting, this quote that we're going to see here in yellow. She cites Ken Hyland, and Ken Hyland says to really pay attention to the verbs being used. And so I think that sometimes, you got it, I had 4 arrows. Can you move it? You write that when you're right here, you have 4 arrows. Look at those, yeah. Oh, perfect, thank you so much. So it's important to consider what verbs or what language pieces your disciplines use. For example, engineers show things, right? They would not think or believe. That's not a thing engineers do, right? Philosophers think, because that's their job. It's the science of thinking. Biologists or scientists often describe. So figuring out what words to use is part of the literature review writing up process, right? What works in my discipline? What are some sort of language features that other articles are using? So as you're reading for structure, you might also read for language, kind of reading it as you would if you were trying to dissect it into the sentence stems used most often or how they begin their sentences or paragraphs. Now it doesn't work because I made you move it. Okay, so there's the slide, here we go. Here are her tips of interactive reading, and here's the key. Like, this is not a magic bullet for making this reading fast and work every time. What you need to have is a system that works for you and a system you can reproduce with almost no thought. And so my system is very similar to this, but I'm not going to go change it just because she says it's great. But I do want to point out a few things. She says that as you're reading, you're going to put 3 asterisks next to the main idea or the main project. And you will have one thing in the whole article that you've marked with 3 stars. And that will become the most important thing. So if it's important for you to gather information and put it into a Word doc, that's what you're putting into a Word doc, right? A citation, the main idea maybe. Then she says if there's multiple competing hypotheses or methods and things, then you might number them. I think that is useful because often the subheadings don't have that. I'm a social scientist, and so noting theory is really important. Like, where is it her ideas and where is it the theory that is underpinning this? So she says to use a TH for theory. And this is the one that was new to me when I read this book. She uses a Q and a plus to, a Q and plus underline, sorry, to note a useful quotation. Often I will underline something and not know what it is, as I mentioned. But if you put a Q next to it, then I know I meant that as a quote to take with me because it said so perfectly that I couldn't reproduce it, right? If you're putting lots of Qs and underlines, then you know that you have way too many quotes. And so the purpose of using quotation in literature reviews especially is that it's said so perfectly you couldn't say it any better, any different way. And it's a major piece of what you're trying to research, right? So I think that that's really, really useful. And then of course, question marks. If you have a question, want to go follow up, connect to something else. Again, this is her system in that book that I showed you. You don't have to do the same system, but I think adopting some of these are really useful. All right, so we've gathered many articles, thousands of them. We've figured out how to sift through them and read them well enough that we can get started. And now we have to start organizing, right? Literature reviews are not just a reporting out of what you read. There is some sort of conceptual meaning being made when you put them together. And so I think that the best way to put that conceptual meaning behind your literature review is to use a concept map or a mind map. Anyone use mind maps or concept maps in their work? Yeah? So I'm just gonna grab some water. So when I started my dissertation work years ago, I thought that I was a linear thinker. I thought that I made an outline and I went and wrote the paper from the outline, right? That does not work in giant projects because no one is really a linear thinker, like not even if we think we are. So concept maps allow us to break out of that linearity and translate really difficult text into our own words. So as we're taking stuff we're reading, we have to put it in our head, translate it into our own language, and spit it out on the concept map in some way. And that process is invaluable. It doesn't happen if you just copy and paste to an outline. We also know that when you start making a concept map, which I'll show you some examples, main ideas and themes sort of start to fall out and group together and connect in interesting ways. And that's the goal of the literature review, is to do that, is to make those themes clear. It's also great for organizing. And it's also wonderful for knowing what words do you not know that you should include? What are the main points that everyone's talking about? How should you include those, etc. So this is a lot. It's just me, I'm sort of a lot. But this is hanging on the wall in my office, so feel free to come check it out. This represents all of my readings for my comprehensive projects. I had a horrible thing that none of yours will be that bad, so it'll be fine. But I had to read 400 books and articles, and I had to somehow put them together and make meaning of them. And so I started to get so overwhelmed that I made this giant poster board, and I just started putting texts on there. And then I started to see that they fell out to these categories. So you see English education is my area, that there's media, there's ways of teaching, there's how language works, there's writing across the curriculum, right? So it started to fall into these areas. And then I started to see authors repeat, right? So if you read anything about writing, you're gonna see giant Imig there. And so I was like, that's an important person. And then I pulled some quotes and some main ideas next to it. So the goal of all this was to read the books, to figure out the themes, to organize it in that way, but then to write a synthesizing paper. But I didn't have to write the paper because my advisors were like, that's more work than writing a paper, right? So this basically means this is almost to writing a paper. Did the same thing when I wrote my dissertation, and then I would say, here's one subheading, here's all the stuff I'm putting in it, here's another subheading, here's all the stuff I'm putting in it. So in that way, this helps you figure out what information is important, figure out how to organize things under themes, and then you can start writing from it. I wish I would have saved the ones I wrote my dissertation from because they all have lines to it, like when I wrote something, I put a line to it. So it can be a working document. There are other ways to do concept maps. So we don't write in library books, right? You have to be friends with the librarians, so don't do that. So if you have library books, you might have Post-it notes. These are small, like 2x2 Post-it notes. And you might read the library book and decide what qualifies for a Post-it note, like what in your mind is important enough to put on a Post-it note. Write on there, stick it in the book, read as much of the book as you can, or you need to. You'll have a book full of Post-it notes, right? And then I actually color-coded these. I think these colors were different sources. I think like pink was one source and dark blue was one and teal was one. And then I would take them out of my book and start to organize them. So the cool thing about Post-it notes is that you can pick things up and move them. You can throw them in like the trash can, like this. I'm like, I think that's interesting, I'm not sure, right? You can do all these different things with them. And then, you know, I see that I have a lot of teal here. And it is not good in a literature review to have a lot of the same color, a lot of the same source. The idea is to synthesize. So I would have to go back and find maybe more of the dark blue. So we can organize things and we can use library books kindly by using Post-it notes. We also can use concept maps to carry out revisions. So you can see that there's some type stuff here, right? How many of us have gotten a draft back from a reviewer or an advisor and they're like, you have to move this here, move that there, right? That happens all the time. So physically cutting a paper apart is so much faster and less frustrating than using Microsoft Word to try to like cut and paste and move things. So you can see here, I physically cut it apart, and then I tried to decide how could I make it better by adding language, I added some citations, I made a new paragraph, etc. So concept maps can help in actually organizing the writing. And then here's what one might look like as you start to engage in a topic. This is one of my own students. She was studying critical literacy. Here's the main idea, and here are the things that are falling out. So you see that there's real world purposes and there's other ideas from it. So as she's starting to read, she's realizing that she has a lot of stuff on questioning the text, but not as much stuff on not just social justice, right? Here's a question. She wanted to go investigate some more. So sometimes with literature reviews, it's hard for us to know, like, when are we finished? When do we have enough? This can help us show that. Here's some quick tips. Use real paper. There are great computer programs out there that I think are super useful. Poplet is one of my favorite ones, P-O-P-P-L-E-T. You had another one?
I use Bubbles, which is bubbl.us, and someone on chat mentioned that they use Scapple, S-C-A-P-P-L-E.
Very good. So those are great, but like I think sometimes we have to really manipulate things for meaning to be made. So I use real paper almost all the time. You don't have to do an outline. You literally can go from reading to this. That's the value in the time saving. You want to always in a literature review group things by theme. So there it is. Already does it for you. You can make connections. You can make boxes, etc. But make sure when you pull stuff from sources, you always attach a citation to it. Whether that be like blue Post-it notes or from this book, or you actually put something in parentheses because you think you will find that again. And I guarantee you will not. Trust me. All right, very quickly. So we don't want to summarize, we want to synthesize. We don't want to connect or collect facts. We instead want to figure out what the project is, right? How do we do that? So we might want to describe and define something. So this might be an organizing way where we can start our literature review by describing and defining a central tenet of what we're studying. And then we might compare and contrast that with a different central tenet that's maybe something that we're positioning ourselves against or that we're excluding in some way. Most often, however, we're going to read a bunch of little tiny things and we're going to synthesize them together to one big square, one big thing, right? This is sort of our goal. And then our second goal is to take that and start writing. Flannery O'Connor says, I write to discover what I know. I sent her my dissertation and I think everywhere else. Because you can't wait until you're done reading to start writing, right? By writing, we realize what we know, what we don't know. The glory of writing is you can't write it if you don't know it, so you'll find out real fast if you don't. But most of the time, you'll realize you have way too much stuff. Go ahead and start writing. How might you do it? How do we avoid plagiarism? Because sometimes accidental plagiarism happens, especially if we're new to the field, or if we're new to graduate school, or if we're new to undergraduate research. I like to read the article, make my notes, then I like to put that article away and try to rewrite a little paragraph about what it was. And then I like to compare those two and try to make sure that I covered everything the author covered, but that I did so in my own words, right? So kind of like trusting my memory, putting the article away so I write it and it sounds like Christy wrote it and not like the author did. and then going back and making sure that the keywords match the authors. And then finally, there are 3 structures of organization that we often see in literature reviews. We might see a chronological structure. So for example, if we're studying how schools have taught evolution, we might say when schools first taught evolution, it looked like this, and we might trace it all the way to 2019, right? That happens rarely because really that's not all that interesting. Like that's just sort of a retelling. We might look at trends. So we might say, oh, you know, in the 50s, schools taught evolution this way, and then something happened, and then in the 80s, they taught it this way, right? So we might look at those big trends, but most often we want it thematically. So even within a chronological or a trend-based literature review, we want to group things into themes. So group things into subheadings where they all of the information is centered around that theme or that main idea. This happens in the reading process, and then when you're ready to write, it comes out pretty easily. So spend your time on the reading and the reviewing. Finally, I sprung these books on my colleague at the library last week, and I think they've been ordered since then, so they're coming, right? The top one is Paul Sylvia's How to Write a Lot. He's a social scientist, a psychologist, I believe. And he talks about fluency strategies. So if you really fear the blank page, there it is. He can get you through that. Guccione and Wellington, these are both British books. A lot of the good work on writing is being done in England. I'm not quite sure why, but both of these are all about how to start and finish a dissertation in a timely manner without hating every minute of it. Super useful. I think this one is better. I think the Bottery and Wright one is the best one if you want to read a book on how to write a dissertation. We'll put this back up at the end to write down or take photos if you'd like.
So I also wanted to say this is a really quick presentation. We're trying to throw everything in an hour. And obviously writing a literature review is a complex process. It's not like something you just sit down, you write it out and you're done and you go home. But there are a lot of resources on campus to help you with this. The first one there is a picture of the library. You're in one of the workshops, so you're already kind of along those lines. But I mentioned before, your subject librarians can be your best friends. I co-authored with a number of my faculty systematic reviews on a frequent basis. I meet with dissertation students on a frequent basis. Oftentimes just sitting down for consultation can get you going in the right direction. You can make appointments with us through email. If you're a student and you connect, your librarian should be listed there along with your advisor. So you can schedule something directly into their calendar, and we meet both in person and online via Zoom. So whichever way is most easy for you to access, that's something you have available. There are also a series of workshops that are specifically geared toward things along this topic. Again, citation management tools that I mentioned. Do have workshops that are coming up in the next month or so. They are in person specifically, but we do have guides online that have videos and can walk you through those steps as well. So for example, I showed you Mendeley. There's a series of about 10 videos, each one's 2 to 3 minutes long, that show you how to do specific tasks, like how to download it and install it, and how to export things into a Word document. So you can use both of those options as well. The second thing that I want to mention is the Campus Writing Center. There are writing tutors there who will work with you on some of those big themes and the thematic writing of your paper. So if you have a lot of big project ideas and you're starting to write it out, but you want some assistance and some feedback, the Campus Writing Center is a great place to go. They have walk-in appointments here in Ellis Library, but they also are right across Lowry Mall. You can see the flags from this window. And next year, they're going to be in Ellis Library. There's going to be a one-stop shop down on the bottom floor. So you have the ability to just show up, make an appointment, either way, get some feedback on your writing. They don't necessarily go through and check punctuation and citations and all those little minute details. They work on you with the bigger picture. Or they work with you, I should say, on the bigger picture. The Mo space down at the bottom picture that's there is to represent the library's institutional repository. Mo space is a digital archive that we maintain of all the materials produced at the University of Missouri. This includes dissertations. So I mentioned before that we do have a way that you can go in and search by discipline and also search by thesis advisors. So you can go and see who's published in your field a dissertation that was successfully defended and what that looked like, and maybe what language was used. What were some of the action verbs that other people in your department have used in dissertations in the past? And again, I think those go back all the way to 1970 electronically. So you don't have to come to the library and visit them in person, you can find them online. And if you are a student writing your dissertation, when you graduate, it will be added to MoSpace so that other people will be able to find your work. If you're a faculty member looking at writing articles for the background, and that's why you're here, or because you're interested in writing a systematic review, those also can go up in MoSpace. NU Libraries is really trying to support open access and this idea that if you write an article and you spend a lot of time writing it, you want it to be accessible. So it's browsed by things like Google Scholar, and it's accessible and free and not behind a paywall. Typically, this happens as soon as you submit to a journal and the journal accepts it. We then work with the journal in terms of copyright negotiations. And oftentimes, the journal will hold copyright for the PDF and the very nice, pretty version with all the graphs. And we will have the submitted manuscript, so more of a Word document that's up online. But the content is the same. The citation counts that you get of the author's manuscript reflect the journal. So it does help with things like tenure and promotion as well. So MoSpace is a really good resource to know. I highly recommend using it regardless of what you're publishing, whether it's a dissertation, an article, conference posters are up in MoSpace. So any academic output that you have, we can make available and findable for other people to use as well.
And in the last 90 seconds, the final picture you see is a beautiful old Italian revival, I believe is the architecture form, house that is where the campus writing program or my program is housed. It is at 6th and Conley. It's worth coming to check out just because it's a beautiful old house. It was built in 1867 and it's been maintained really well. And so in that, we are not the writing center. So Kimberly mentioned that there's a writing center with tutors that help you. We instead kind of have a twofold focus. One is to support the faculty of the WI courses, which I mentioned, but the other is to support you as writers. And so on the back table, there's this little handout that says Campus Writing Program at the top, and it's two sides. This is a listing of all of our events. So for example, next week, Dr. Martha Kelly from Russian Studies and I are doing a workshop on graphic organizers and concept maps. And so if you found that interesting, you might want to come and check that out. Even more exciting is that we host writing retreats. And those retreats are when we don't talk at you at all. We open up the doors at 9 a.m. and you come in and find a spot in this beautiful old house. We brew a bunch of coffee. A department buys you lunch. You don't have to go anywhere. And you can write from 9 to 3 on those days. But we do ask that you register, and they're all on here. If you're a grad student, there's special ones just for you that we hold just for grad students. So check that out. Those are super productive times because no one can find you. It's a quiet space and you don't have to leave to do any sort of human things. Then finally, I'm excited to announce that I'm teaching a class. So if you thought what I did was interesting today, you can have a whole semester of me. This is a 2-hour class. It's called Academic and Professional Writing for Graduate Students. It'll be held in spring 2020. And the idea is that it will take you from beginning to end of writing a dissertation. So give you lots of ideas of how to do it. Lots of language focus. So if you're a multilingual writer and language are sometimes a struggle for that, then we'll have a language focus each week, etc. This is on the back table as well. And we finish with 20 seconds to spare.